Welcome to episode 555 of the Barcelona podcast, brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Dan Hilton. He's Domagoj Kostanjšak. And I feel like we were a little spoiled this week, Domagoj, without having a midweek game. I finally got a little bit of rest. Okay, I still sound terrible. I know. This terrible cough won't go away, but I did get a bit of rest, and I feel better if that matters. But then again, we only got this free midweek because Barca choked in the Copa del Rey against Athletic Club. And so they should probably be playing this week. So not really a silver lining the way I think we'd want it to be.
I know. I mean, we'll take it though. I think at this point in the season, when you can get some time off to rest players to just recuperate, have a little think, we'll just take it because yes, I mean the circumstances are not really great. The season is not really going that well, but you know what? We'll just take it as we go and see what happens next.
Again, I want to remind everyone: Barcelona finished the game against Alaves with 12 healthy first-team players. And that was just because they just registered Fermin Lopez, and that made it 12. So at the moment, with Ter Stegen likely coming back, Rafinha apparently training as well, Cancelo looks like he could also continue to be back. So it looks like the cavalry might be coming soon. At least, again, Ter Stegen likely will start against Granada. So I do almost immediately, again, this is no disrespect to Iñaki Peña, but I do kind of expect that back line to get a little bit better, especially when dealing with set pieces and especially when dealing with those long ball counters that they're dealing with. I do think that Ter Stegen is just going to elevate that back line a bit more than Iñaki Peña did. But the other actual real silver lining, though, Domagoj, you and I got a few days to think about was the big picture stuff from the Alaves match, which I think starts and ends with Andres Christensen as the defensive midfielder. Because, I think with young players, we are definitely going to talk about Cubarsi right now, Lamine Yamal, and probably Hector Ford today. I think with young players, we wind up being prisoners of the moment, where it's hard to say, okay, this is what we have in a 16 or 17-year-old. And you almost want to say, because you want to protect them, you project out 2-3 years. But I think for the Christensen move that we're starting to talk about here, it's actually just about the rest of Xavi's time in charge. That's, I think, the only time period that you'd say that this Christensen experiment really does affect. So they want to try to do something in the Champions League. You have to finish top 4 in the Liga. And this experiment with Christensen is about those objectives and those objectives alone and nothing beyond this season. And, from the thought experiments that we have to go through, and especially with the big picture stuff and Barca's finance and all that stuff, it's actually nice to only have to think about what a tactical move means for the next 3 or 4 months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, you're right, actually. And, all things considered, I quite liked his performance. I enjoyed it. I mean, having now watched it a bit more closely, I mean, I feel like he's done things quite well. Of course, he didn't exactly move any mountains. I mean, but he wasn't really supposed to do that either. And that right there matters as well, because people look at the performance and they're like, oh, he was so low volume, he wasn't really doing much. But that was the whole point of that experiment. When you analyze that performance, it's very important to emphasize that his role was just to keep it simple, right? His role was to recycle play. His role was to be the enabler, to be the shield, if you will, and nothing more, nothing less. And he did that quite well, and that's okay. I mean, it's the role that Romeo was meant to do. I mean, exactly that role, and that's why I kept saying Romeo, the profile still fits, because he was meant to do the simple things. He was meant to do the little things, and then. So unfortunately, he fell off individually, but also the structure kind of didn't favor him that much. And this system, that role fits Christensen as well, I feel like. So that's why he can be used in that role. But I would say that even with this one game cameo, I think that Christensen might have made Romeo redundant already. I feel like if he can keep this up, that is. I mean, he's younger, he's faster, he's a better highland defender as well. He's a better passer, better carrier of the ball, and plus he has the experience as well. This is what surprised me the most, because when I was doing research for this experiment, I found out that he already has about 1,000 or so minutes as a midfielder throughout his career, which is not a big number for a career role, but it still counts. It's still something. Of course, we have to see more before making any sort of final conclusions and big statements. But this was quite promising to me, and as you said, for the rest of the season, it could be something that Xavi can look to and maybe use as a boost, right? It wasn't without flaws, to be honest with you. I mean, at this stage, I think he can only be, exclusively a double pivot midfielder, right? I don't think he has it in him at this stage to be someone who can marshal the whole midfield for Barcelona. I don't think that happens right now. Unless Xavi decides to pull in a bigger experiment and play him in a John Stones role, because I think that's what would suit him even more. He struggles in tight spaces. Obviously, he struggles when he's pressed from all sides, and that's when he starts making those extra little touches and he fumbles play and he's not quick to react. And I think that matters for a single pivot. But if you put him away from that scenario, if you put him away from the pressure and from the tight spaces, I think he can work quite well. And there are a couple of ways to actually do that. I've done a whole piece actually on exactly that, how to maximize Christensen as a pivot. And the main point would be to just move him away from the tight spaces, have him face the play forward, and then he can do what he does well, which is break lines and be the progressive player that he is. And when you sustain pressure in the final third, for example, you also have him on the outside of the defensive block, of the opposition's defensive block. That way, again, he's not in the thick of it, he's not in the middle of the things, and he can kind of orchestrate or create from outside going in. So I think in that sense, you have a player there who can do something different, because Romeo cannot do that, but Christensen could do it. So it remains to be seen if Xavi gives this experiment more continuity, but I think he should at this stage.
Yeah, I think it feels unfair to Romeo, but it's not. Or Romeo, even though he's a stopgap, was not supposed to be the long-term pivot option. He was signed to be not even in case of emergency, but he was supposed to help be the defensive midfielder this season at a certain level and allow Barcelona and Xavi to play four midfielders and play in that formation that Xavi feels like you get the best out of Pedri and De Jong and Gundogan. And that was the whole point of signing Romeo. So I do think that coming in, even the ceiling for Romeo as a defensive midfielder, he was supposed to be a ball winner. He was supposed to be somebody that could deliver these long diagonals on the counter and get Barcelona moving. And I think what he was supposed to do was the job, not even of Busquets, but of some version, right? A C-level version of what Busquets was asked to do last season, and without comparisons. But Christensen, we almost lowered the bar on him because he is a center back playing defensive midfield, and the expectations for him are a bit different because, to your point, he is a much, much better, obviously, a much, much better ball winner than Oriol Romeo. Oriol Romeo, in fact, to me, at Girona last season, and the stats proved it, he was an adequate to almost above average defensive midfield destroyer type or ball winner. I'm going to say that instead of destroyer. But Christensen is just, he's better at that. And Romeo has not lived up to that expectation as a ball winner. And then you think about, as you mentioned about those tight spaces, right? What does Christensen not do? What Christensen doesn't do in terms of delivering those long diagonals that you'd expect pivot in Barcelona's system to do. And he also doesn't, as you said, he does not turn quickly and make a good decision on the ground in tight spaces. He just doesn't do that. He doesn't have technical ability to do that. He's a center back playing as a defensive midfielder. But for the remainder of this season, at least, also to your point, he raises the ceiling in a way that Romeo does not, or any other player you'd play in that position, of the other three midfielders in Xavi's system. It allows Barcelona to fundamentally play the way Xavi wants them to play, with Pedri and Gundogan operating more as high interiors and De Jong having a bit more of a free role and being asked to do less ball winning himself. And that is what Xavi, that is how the setup for Xavi works. And to the point too about, we're going to get to João Felix later, but Lamine Yamal, who we're also going to talk about later, is the only player right now for Barcelona who can take anybody on the wing. That sounds like hyperbole, but it's not. He's the one guy that can win 1v1s, and he's the one guy in Barcelona that can attract a second defender without fail and not lose the ball at a high percentage. Lamine Yamal, numerically, is Barcelona's only winger. And then up top, you have Vitor Roque and Lewandowski, and even Mark Yu. You do have three options at your almost center forward position to knock in some goals. And again, Vitor Roque and Mark Yu in limited time have been very promising with their goals per minute. And then we're actually not talking about Lewandowski today. Everybody knows how that's going. So that means on that left wing, based on the system that you're playing with and the options that you have, it is almost a waste to play or attempt to play even Cancelo on the left wing or another left winger. Just play Pedri on the left wing or Gundogan higher up underneath Lewandowski and fading out to that left, and have De Jong also on the left of that double pivot and defending like hell. And you kind of keep your shape, because Barcelona in transition have been an abomination. I said I think it's going to get better with Ter Stegen. So I actually tend to be really optimistic about how this Christensen move does not move Barcelona closer to the Champions League title. It does not raise their ceiling, but I do feel like because of the way he enhances De Jong's responsibilities and he negates what Pedri and Gundogan have to do in trying to ball win themselves, and they're allowed to just be who they are. I mean, Gundogan probably played his best game of the season against Alaves numerically because he didn't have to worry about doing what is unnatural to him. And I do think that Christensen, again, instead of raising Barcelona's ceiling, at least for this season, with the goals that Barcelona Xavi has, he raised the floor to a really adequate amount where I say, yeah, I don't think this should be just a one-off thing against Alaves. I think Xavi should commit to this. And I know it's 3 weeks, 21st? So that's 2 weeks away for Napoli. But yeah, for the next 2 weeks, every day in training. Again, there's now no midweek games, and you've got Granada, which is a great side looking at the league table to experiment against. So take that time against Granada, take your time against Celta de Vigo, and iron out these issues or whatever issues there are and try to get, again, the floor of this as high as you possibly can to basically survive La Liga and try to survive the tie against Napoli and get some positive results. And so that's why I think I'm not optimistic. I think I'm saying like I feel like I've got good vibes of what Christensen presents as a defensive midfielder, at least for the next few months, because of how he enhances everyone else more than I'm really excited about Christensen as Barcelona's defensive midfielder of the future. I don't think it's sustainable in the long term. I don't think he's a long-term option, but I think he allows Xavi to get the best out of De Jong, Gundogan, and Pedri based on the personnel he has right now.
Yes, I would agree with that. I don't think he's a long-term option either. I mean, for the rest of the season, absolutely, yes, he can do that, but that's mostly because Barca don't have anyone else to do it anyway. I mean, it's either Christensen or Romeo, right? Or you do something with Pedri and De Jong or Gundogan and De Jong, but that's also not optimal because, there's a...
He just turned 32 and he's out injured, so,
Well, yeah, I know. So there you go. Yeah, I think Christensen just kind of forces himself into that lineup, and that's a good thing because Barca lack athletes, right? They have a leaky structure. Everyone knows this. We're not really compact. We don't really defend as a unit anymore, or have never done that under Xavi. Even I would go as far as to say that. But Christensen, as an athlete, just as a pure defender, he kind of mask some of those flaws, right? He can kind of patch up those flaws because we saw against Alaves, there were situations where he was left on an island and he could make up that ground. Sometimes not, because the holes were just too big even for him to cover. But sometimes he would make it through his, just through his physicality alone. And I think Romeo, he would not be able to do even not even close to what Christensen can do that.
Well,
so
honestly, actually, looking back at my Alaves notes, I not only agree with that point, but I want to extrapolate that what if even farther in that his mistakes, Christensen's mistakes, and that pace of play for him, there were mistakes in the first 10 minutes. And
the first touch, right? Mm-hmm.
Right. I think, and he ironed those out, but Alaves did not score in the first 10 minutes. And I think, again, no disrespect to Romeo here, but I think if Romeo was starting that game, I think Barcelona concede in those first 10 minutes before he kind of finds his rhythm in the game. Fortunately, Barca didn't concede. And Christensen, I thought, from minute 10 on, was much better in the first 10 minutes.
Oh, he was absolutely, but yeah, he grew into the game. And I think, to your point, he's not someone who can turn into space. He's not that agile. His turning radius is quite limited, right? But then again, I saw quite a few games where he played as a pivot, and okay, granted, those were mostly international games, right? So there's more space, there's more time to turn on the ball. But when there is space and time, he can do that. He can do this one-touch turn, the half turn. He can go into space. But I think in this particular game, so this was his first game as a pivot for Barca, and I think it was more kind of wanting to play it safe than not being able to do it. He could do it, but it's risky because he has a marker on his back. He doesn't have that much space, but he doesn't want to risk it. But I feel like just the physical aspect of his. So the athletic aspect is kind of the upside here. When you look how he's built, he's much better built than Romeo. He has these powerful legs. His upper body is also quite developed, so he's more of a swimmer. He's not really a footballer even. When you see his pictures, and I never really took much note of that before, but when you actually analyze how he's structured, how he's built, he's a really, really good athlete, right? So I think those long legs, you can see him. He can kind of tackle from behind. He can wrap around the markers and do the tackle like that. He can make up ground really quickly, and he's very, very fast from a standstill position, which is what surprised me. He has a good top speed, and he has good acceleration from a standpoint position, even over short distances, and then he has a little gap in between where he's slower to accelerate, but once he reaches top speed, he's quite fast. And so I think there's a highlight defender in there somewhere, which is good for Barca, and that's someone who can kind of make up for those structural issues a little bit, not completely, obviously, but he can do stuff that kind of mitigate the damage at least, and that's a good thing for me.
Yeah, and it is in the long run, as you said too, that the times that he's played defensive midfield with Denmark, and then dating back to his Borussia Mönchengladbach days, which is quite a few years ago now, almost 7-8 years ago. I mean, he was almost basically a teenager when he was doing that, and he played a little bit at youth level as well back in Denmark. And so he, it's in him. He's done it before, but what was when we talk about ceilings and floors again? Like, what was the highest level that he played as a defensive midfielder, and what was the best teams he played against? He never had to do it where all the eyes of the world were on you, the way that Barcelona matches are when he was doing such a thing. And pivoting a little bit here, because yes, there are pros and cons of the Christensen thing, but what allows this Christensen experiment to happen at all is that Pau Cubarsí was already ready. And I said that this kid a year ago, I have my receipts. Everybody knows that. I said that he was the best center back prospect that I'd ever seen in La Masia at 15. I said that last year. And yet, he is ahead of schedule in where I thought I'd see him in the first team. Because I always say in those La Masia updates that people always ask for. Now, I used to do them every 6 months, and I'd be like, oh, do I have enough for every 6 months? Now I feel like I could do them every week, and there's like a new kid I'm talking about. And then he's already in the first team. I don't even have time to update you to the first team. But in the first half of the season, he got named to a bunch of the bench, 2 or 3 times in what was it, August to October. And then a few weeks of just being on the bench, getting called to the first team. And, you're just waiting for him to at least make the debut. And I figured just like Mark Costa right now, who we can throw in here at the end of this conversation, but I just figured that I just figured that Costa was on the bench because as a break glass case of emergency, and he's available. And same thing with Cubarsí. But no, Cubarsí, Xavi was just incorporating in the first team, putting him on the bench because he was going to trust him because he already trusted what he saw in training. And so now I come out of Alaves saying, do you know who our best defender was in that match up in the Basque Country in hostile territory? It wasn't Araujo or Koundé. It was a 17-year-old kid. And the question with him in the first team, as long as he can hold his own defensively, center backs do lose out on duels sometimes. And I think as a young player, those mistakes are going to be chalked up to inexperience, and we're going to have more eyes on those. But looking at his games in the Liga this season, okay, so not the two Copa del Reys, but just the Liga, he handled Willian Jose against Real Betis. I actually thought he did fine against Moreno and Sorloth for Villarreal until that game got completely out of hand for everybody. And remember, he was also subbed on at halftime for Christensen because Christensen wasn't any better in the first 45 minutes. And then it was a team breakdown late. Then that was more, it was a team thing more than it was individual mistakes by Cubarsí that I look at. And both he and Araujo were getting screamed at also for not pressuring Sorloth higher when he received it. So again, if you're going to criticize Cubarsí late in that game, then Araujo, somehow you're going to criticize even more. Then Osasuna, he definitely handled Budimir and those late runs by Oroz, the attacking midfielder. And Osasuna just play a little bit of a different system than a lot of teams in the Liga, but that didn't seem to trouble Cubarsí. And then against Alaves, I thought he did a fine job against Samu because, a reminder, Samu's goal was against Araujo on that cross that Young allowed. Cubarsí had nothing to do with the one goal that Alaves scored. Here's his Liga stats this season. 60.2 passes per game, 91% accuracy, 1.5 tackles per game, 1.8 clearances per game. He's been dribbled past 0 times, and he's committed 0 fouls. Beyond the stats, too, and now just talking about the attacking part, because again, that's a lot of that's even the defensive stuff, where all he has to be is average, because the upside he already provides with the ball at his feet is so useful to Xavi, especially a team that needs to be press resistant, the way that this Barca team is not and needs to be if you're going to have that much possession. He's playing progressive, line-breaking passes as a right-footed player from the wide left channel. That requires skill, bravery, and yet he does it consistently already. And that is just, it's absurd to me, Domagoj. Center back is one of those positions that I have to trust people who play center back, because that was a position. I mean, take one look at me. Clearly, center back was not the thing that I did, but he is so special on the ball. And And again, this whole Christensen conversation happens because Koundé and Araujo was not we have to have this center back pairing. Koundé is still playing right back, and that's forcing Hector Ford over to the left side and Cancelo wherever he needs to be. But Koundé is still playing right back, and you have Araujo obviously in the middle there, having his worst season in a Barcelona uniform consistently, and Cubarsi allows all of that to work because of just how ready he has been. There is almost an argument to be made. Maybe I've revved myself up, so you can just kind of bring me back home here. There is an argument to be made that Cubarsi systemically has been, I'm not going to say more than, because that would be hearsay, but has been just as essential to what Xavi is trying to do in the second half of this season as Lamine Yamal is going to be. That Cubarsi and Lamine Yamal, for the way that Xavi wants to play, are just as important as one another. That is just how important I think Cubarsi has been.
That's true. And I think it also kind of ties to Christensen again, because he is the progressive ball playing center back as well. But I feel like this season in particular, he has kind of, I don't know, dropped off a little bit in terms of his passing. Maybe the stats would prove me wrong, but the eye test would say that I think that he's not as, I don't know, maybe not just adventurous, or maybe not as accurate as he used to be, or as he can be. And I feel like, yes, to your point, in comes Cubarsí, this kid from La Masia, and suddenly he fits the bill perfectly, and he does all these things that he's required to do, and even more. And of course, he can be an extremely valuable talent if developed properly, which I think he's heading that way as of right now. And I think that much is pretty clear to pretty much everyone at this point. And yes, we can gush over his line-breaking passes, from the back line all day, all night, and they are truly something, because as you said, they take skill and they take courage, and they take experience as well, because in those situations, especially if your system is not, if your structure is not really that optimal, it's difficult to find those passes, right? But nowadays we can expect this from and take this from granted, even when it comes to La Masia talents. So I feel like the athletic side of his profile, so the defensive side, is kind of the even more exciting thing, to be honest with you. I mean, sure, he has shown his age here and there, and that's fair, but mostly he's done extremely well when called upon, and that's big for such a young player. I think he's 5'11" or something like that. I'm not sure. 5'11", I would say, which is a decent height, but at the same time, he gives this impression that he's even much bigger and much more powerful, because he imposes himself correctly on the match, right? He is relatively short for a center back, I would say, if I can say that. I think so, but the genes don't really favor him that much, but he makes it work nonetheless. That's the exciting thing for me. It's a combination of talent and hard work, which is it's very impressive. So there's a natural gift in all of that, in that conversation, but there's also that good old-fashioned grit as well. So he can go really far, I would say, and I would even say that he has the potential to play this hybrid role of a defender and a midfielder as well. If Xavi or whoever comes next decides to be that bold one day, he can grow into something that's even more than a center back. But looking at it right now, he definitely fits the bill, because he provides you with the progression, and he provides you with the defensive side as well, which is something that Barca lack. They don't really have a complete defender on the team as of right now. So Araujo is on one spectrum, and then Koundé is on the other, for example, and Christensen would be somewhere in the middle, because he's the best of both worlds, but at the same time, he's been shaky in his progressiveness and his distribution from the back, at least I would say from the eye test for now. And Cubarsí is kind of, he's the best of both worlds, and he can develop even further. I think that's a player to keep. That's a player who can be very, very valuable in the future.
Well, yeah, I mean that combination, that setup. I saw yesterday there was this the story going around that Araujo and Pau Cubarsí are Barcelona's center back pairing in the future. And obviously, you read that, I'm just like, well, that's a story. Like, no duh. Like, obviously, but there's obviously merit to that combination too, because that's what works. And even for Barcelona, going back, Cubarsí, to your point, he's a little bit like this much taller than Puyol, and he's like this much taller than Mascherano, who played next to Piqué, and there were times when Yaya Toure would play next to Puyol as well. And so there is precedent between that defender that is smaller, but very much like Mascherano and Puyol, to your point, his positioning, because I think right now the inexperience you see, he'll get caught on the wrong side and this happened with Samu twice. He got caught on the wrong side, but he's so intelligent with his body positioning already. He does know how to get himself out of trouble without fouling, which is something that is way beyond an experience for his years. And you go back to it, and that was something that Mascherano and Puyol did so well. That even if, and Mascherano more than Puyol even, Puyol was just so sturdy and strong that very rarely did he get caught goal side. But Mascherano would get caught goal side sometimes, and then he would have to then orient his body to then get, not commit the foul and get some part of the ball to poke that thing loose. And we see a similar thing with Cubarsi, that even if he gets out muscled with the upper half, or he, can't use his, to your point, like his height, and he gets on the wrong side, I think that'll get better and improve over time defensively with reps, of course. But I also think the instincts to not foul already are really high. And that, again, to me, is why he's such a high level prospect, even though he's the same height or just a little taller than Eric Garcia and Puyol and Mascherano. And that really is like, I can't believe I said Eric Garcia and Puyol in the same sentence, talking defending. But here we are. That's what we're doing here. But and then the last note on Cubarsí is that, this week I'm thinking that his agent did let it leak that his release clause is 10 million, because even though he just signed his pro contract at 16 years old, a year ago, the renewal is now starting at a higher number already for that new senior contract, I believe when he turns 18, because of his performance of the first team. And again, as negative as that is, and as scary as that is, because, Barcelona fans have seen La Masia talents head for greener pastures when they ask for more money. But with his talent, the silver lining is that if he wants to be at Barcelona, as we just saw with Gavi's contract renewal, renewing a La Masia kid who popped off and is usually still cheaper than bringing somebody else in. It's usually the case that Barcelona is going to save money over the next, 6-7 years by renewing Cubarsí, even at a higher number at 18, than they would by bringing in another 23 or 24-year-old stopgap on the wage bill. Because even Gavi, I know they're trying to renew his contract, but I believe the new upgrade is like 6.5 mil per season. When if they brought in a talent like Gavi, that player makes 10 to 12 to 13, and Gavi, because of his age and because he's been with Barcelona, he renewed at a number that fits the wage structure. And if Cubarsí wants to stay, that's the number he stays at. And because goal scorers, you always have to pay for goals. Center backs, Barcelona can kind of set the what would you call that? They kind of, they can kind of set it, even though it's a higher number, they still kind of can set the precedent because, the agent isn't arguing about goals. So unless the agent asks for something utterly outrageous, like with Moriba, and we've seen other talents before, then yeah, Cubarsí might be gone, but I don't think he's going anywhere. So I'm not too worried about that. Now, maybe we'll just spend 1 second here on Marc Castado. I have been warning people now for about a year and a half that I just didn't see him as a first team regular. And I know people are kind of waiting for him to get the opportunity. But as I've said a bunch of times, I think he is stuck somewhere between a pivot and interior, somewhere in first division level. And honestly, he reminds me of Manchu, the player who moved to Real Valladolid. I think that is about the player which is not a bad thing. I mean, he's a first team regular at Real Valladolid. He's a starter, and I think he's a first division player. And I think that's about where Marc Castado is. Maybe he's a little bit better than Manchu. So instead of Real Valladolid, maybe for Castado, we can be talking about a top half team, whoever that may be. I don't want to say Sevilla because they're not a top half team. Whoever it is, like Real Betis or whatever. I think that might be more his level. And I do think with the way that Xavi has shown you his trust in young talent, and I also have been saying the players that he keeps calling up to training are the ones that I agree that are probably the ones with the highest ceilings when I watch them at youth level. And Xavi's kind of agreeing with me on that. And so I think the fact that I seem to be agreeing with Xavi now for the last 2 years, I think that kind of does almost, give me some vindication that I think Castado is who I think he is, which again is not a bad thing. I think it's a first team professional who can help Barcelona on the margins, but Barcelona already has a captain, Sergio Roberto, to help them on the margins. And so if Castado's stuck around for next season, maybe he gets the minutes that Sergio Roberto had this year if Barcelona don't bring in Alex Garcia or somebody else. Because I think that is where Castado might get a few minutes here or there. But again, that's Roberto right now, and he's, 12 years older, and, kind of been there, done that.
Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of Casado. I mean, I've been for a while now, and I've been saying, okay, he needs a shot, he needs to play more, he needs the chance to prove himself. But yeah, I would kind of agree with you that he's kind of transitioning into this more of a hybrid type of player, and a lot of it has to do with his physique. I think he's one of those diminutive midfielders that kind of work better as an interior perhaps than a pivot necessarily, but it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, Gavi is someone who's also kind of, he's small, but he kind of makes up for it through other things as well. He's a more aggressive player. I think Cancelo can be that as well, in that mold of a player potentially. But he has the talent, he has the ability to kind of play the role. He understands the role. I just think it's the physique that kind of pulls him down at the moment, especially compared to someone like Nico, for example. I mean, yeah, I mean, Nico is also a hybrid of sorts, right? And Casaro is as well. So it'll be interesting to see which one of those two players would be a better benchmark for a Barca pivot. I feel like a combination of them two would be would be best, but unfortunately, there's no such player at the moment. But if he does get a chance in the first team, it could be, as you said, it could be someone like, it could be an interior role where he gets to be higher up the pitch and he gets to use his on the ball ability a bit more, while not being forced into these physical encounters, into these athletic duels as much. And I think that's what bogs him down and kind of pulls him down the pecking order as well. But otherwise, I mean, I'm a big fan of the player, and I've always been, and I've done threads on him and pieces on him, and I've said that he needs a chance. But at the moment, especially when you have Christensen as well, and you have a new pivot who's probably going to be signed. Well, probably, we keep seeing those reports, but if someone, yeah,
they have 8 euros.
Yeah, I know,
Yeah,
I know, right? But if someone is signed, which that's all people talk about, and that's what the club is also talking about. Well, not the club, but the reports would be that the club is looking for someone. So if they do find someone, if you have Christensen, if you have, well, Romeo won't be here for long. I don't feel like, but I just don't think someone like Casado will be there. Not at least not as one of the first two choices. So I think.
I mean, I also think that honestly, I also think on like the ceiling, we talk about ceilings. Everything, every time I watch Marc Bernal, I just think Marc Bernal by the summertime is going to have moved ahead on Costa on the depth chart already. Like any minutes now you give an inexperienced, we'll say that interior pivot, right? Like that basically the guy that's stuck between Frankie de Jong and Romeu, as a profile. I think you give all those minutes next season or even in the preseason to Marc Bernal, because I think his ceiling is just so much higher. Physically, he's already, has the body already. He's just 16, so he's 4 years younger than Costado. So I think the ceiling and the potential is all there for Bernal. I think Costado has already kind of fallen behind in Barcelona's like future as soon as next season. Again, that's how I think Bernal, as I've said, of what I've seen this season with Barca Athletic and in the UEFA Youth League, was still very much, again, a 16-year-old in a really, maybe the most difficult position in all of world football right now to play that defensive midfielder pivot. So it's the learning curve for that position and for him has been, exponential this year, and it might be the same thing next year. So he might not be ready next year, but and I think for Costa, the reason why he keeps getting called up for the first team is not to come in as a pivot, but to spell the young in case of emergency. And the thing about the way that Xavi has to sub with these patterns is that unless De Jong gets hurt, he's going to play 90 every time. So that's why I think you're not seeing Costado, because again, I don't think we've seen this for the first team. Costado was not coming in as a lone pivot. He's coming in as a double pivot and playing in that, we'll say, dribbling or drive the ball forward role that De Jong occupies. So Costado is De Jong sub, not a future pivot with Barcelona or anything like that. And so because De Jong plays 90 minutes every match, because you're already looking at it that Lewandowski's 35 and Xavi has Vitor, Roque, and Mark Gu, and the only ones that seem to be healthy are these young number 9s. So you have those young players to put in up top. You'd love to rotate Lamine Yamal if you possibly could. Cancelo constantly gets hurt, or someone else constantly gets hurt. Every match they've lost a player. Ferran Torres, Balde. Xavi makes at least one injury substitution in the first half of a match, and then you have what was the other player? Yeah, I mean, and then you have Pedri, of course, who needs to come out of every match in the 60th minute. And then I would even prioritize, like in the match against Alaves, taking Gundogan out and giving a 32-year-old some rest more than I do De Jong. So that means De Jong is playing 90 minutes, and he's one of the last players to be subbed in any game. So that means Castro is just not seeing the field. And unless De Jong goes down again, I think maybe there's an opportunity for Castro just because of how Oruvame was completely falling off the face of the earth. But now to what we talked about before, though, with Christensen potentially now being a pivot and able to play the pivot position, I just don't know how you see Castro. Now, speaking of, it's that special time that Domagoj comes on, and I get to poke and ask him about João Felix. But we're not really about João Felix here. This is actually more about the Jorge Mendes and Cancelo and all that stuff, because talking about Hector Fort here, he is right-footed. He is a right back or a right center back, not a left back. And yet, he's playing at left back for the first team. And it's almost unfair to him that he's coming up in the same time as Lamine Yamal and Cubarsi, because Hector Fort is like, those two are A+ prospects, and Fort is still like a B+ prospect, or I would even argue an A- prospect as a wingback in world football. Like, oh, how many academies in world football would love to be able to pluck Hector Fort and say, hey, we've got our right back of the future right here. We just signed him, right? Like, that's how high of a prospect as an outside wingback he is in the youth ranks in world football. And, the fact that he is being asked by Xavi, almost out of necessity, to step into tackles with his weight on his opposite foot and play out of the back on his opposite foot, and just defend backwards, just shows you what his ceiling could be as a right back. And every time I watch the Las Palmas game and I'm watching Julian Araujo, it kind of changes the calculation for me. I've been pretty steadfast about Barca probably wanting to go for Cancelo because he can play as a winger, he can play at fullback, and while he is inconsistent, he just does things that other players can't do with the ball at a really high level. And it would behoove Barcelona to have a player who can play with such versatility at so many positions in their team if you can afford it. And while you've been on, and I hear you on João Felix, I know, I hear you about the speciality of João Felix. I don't see how there's a way with Barcelona's current financial situation that they should go for João Felix. I agree with you on what he does. It just financially, it will never make sense because the money isn't being spent on either a cheaper and similarly productive left winger or a pivot or an actual left back as well to Belbalde. But, if Cubarsí is the real deal, which I said he is, and then you keep Araujo, Koundé, and Christensen and don't sell any of those three in the offseason, I am all for Koundé, Fort, and Julian Araujo being your right back options for next season. I think that's more than fine for Barcelona. And there are three different profiles who give you different options, and all three have higher ceilings than what the floor is. I have one more point on João Felix here. João Felix has 7 goals and 5 assists in 28 games and 1,625 minutes. Our old friend Ansu Fati has 4 goals and 1 assist in 18 games and 667 minutes, so about 1,000 less minutes. Ansu has a goal every 167 minutes. Felix is around 233 minutes. And I know that João Felix has 7 more goal contributions, but again, it's still 1,000 more minutes. And Ansu's health also, that's always the big thing with him. I get that. But if Barcelona need to spend money on a pivot, again, to basically be a stopgap, an actual stopgap that Romeo failed to do until Marc Bernal is ready, I think you take what Ansu can give you next season because you don't have to pay the transfer fee that you have to pay and a similar or greater salary that you'd have to pay for João Felix. And if Mendes is really, and I think this is the new thing I'm saying now, if Mendes is really like, hey, buddy, and I do say that, merry tongue-in-cheek, when he says, Laporta, buddy, let's get this deal done, right? Like, I helped you with a bunch of my clients, and so help me out, João Felix and Cancelo. Let's bring those guys in. I think I'm now moved to the point where if Mendes says it's both or neither, I've now moved into the camp where I don't think Cancelo, with the other right back options, is worth João Felix and Cancelo. I think Barcelona has to say no then to both if that's the hard line that Mendes is throwing at them. And they say we can make do in other areas and spend our whatever little money that we have. Because, I mean, whether you believe Tebas or not, the one-to-one is going to be really difficult for Barcelona unless they do part with multiple players. I mean, De Jong's not going anywhere. Lewandowski's likely not going to go. So you are talking about Gavi, Pedri, Araujo, and Barcelona would be insane to do that. So that means you've got to make solutions happen in other ways. And I just don't think that Cancelo and João Felix are reasonable anymore. If Barcelona and Libero, that German company, if they pay them the 80 million or whatever they owe them, and they sell the Barca media for 49% or whatever, and everything that they've promised in the books go through, which at this point almost nothing has, and those deadlines are in March and April. So if that money doesn't come in, it doesn't work. But if 100 million euros just popped up in Barcelona's accounts because they made some sponsorships work, sure. João Felix, Cancelo, get it done, reinforce the squad.
I mean, it's difficult. Someone will have to leave. I mean, if all these reports are to be believed, Barca need to sell. They need to sell big if they want to sign anyone, and they want to sign, I don't know, a pivot, and they want to sign even more players. So I think big will.
Rafinha, though, I've been saying this for a while. I do get the sense that Rafinha, with the way that those reports pop up about him, I do think he's got man out, and I do think that Barca could get like 60 million of Premier League money for him.
They could, but then if Rafinha is sold, which I'm actually, I wouldn't sell him, but at the same time, he is one of those sellable assets that you have. He is marketable. He has suitors. He has the value as well, so you can sell him quite well, especially considering Barca need money. But then again, if you do sell him, you just left with Lamine Yamal, and you need someone else to come in, right? You need someone either from the academy, but that's also not optimal to have two kids on the flank, or you need to bring someone else in for cheaper to save some of that money from Rafinha's sale. So that means that's another position that you have to strengthen if you sell Rafinha, because you can't just sell him and do nothing for that right wing, right? So I think that's kind of the issue there. And then De Jong, I don't know. De Jong could be that player to be sold, but then again, I don't know. I don't think that's happened. I mean,
it's not. There's no way he's going to say, "Oh yeah, of course, 37.5 million euros. I don't want that. It's fine. I don't want to stay in Barcelona where I just had a baby, by the way, and I just had a baby. I'm going to raise my family in Barcelona. Like, it's crazy to think that.
Yeah.
The only thing the club could say is, "Hey, De Jong, if you love the club, we're going to pay you all your money, but let's do it over the next 35 years and extend your contract that way," because that's the only way that De Jong financially, I think, helps Barcelona. The other name that obviously I've said here on the show, other than Rafinha, is Koundé. He's the other one I think is marketable, and you could get a hefty price for him to send him to likely the Premier League. But he would be there. Again, I'm not pushing. To your point, I would keep Koundé and Rafinha if given the option. And I think that's the other thing too. If it is, I don't know how the money works, but if you're asking, I'll make you answer instead of me. João Felix and Cancelo or Rafinha and Koundé. Which of those two options are you keeping and taking?
I think last time it was Koundé versus Cancelo and Felix. That was the question last time, I think, if I remember correctly on the show. And I went for Felix and Cancelo, but I think this time I'm going to go for Rafinha and Koundé. I think, because the thing is, with Felix, I agree with you. I mean, I'm probably his biggest fan on Twitter. I probably the only person who's still defending Felix at this point. The thing is,
I don't think you're wrong to do that though. Like I want to lift you up and say, like, you're very brave to do that on social media, yes, but I think to that point, I think I've always agreed with you that João Felix is special, and those moments, and he may be inconsistent, but you'd think that if Barcelona as a unit were more consistent, then you'd get more consistency from him too. I think as inconsistent as Barca is, the variance of this team, and then you have players that themselves are inconsistent. It's just the ebbs and flows and the pendulum swings back and forth so greatly. And if there was an environment that supported him to be more consistent, I think I agree with you. He's a really special player. Just again, where I'm out on him is just, it's the number. That's what I'm seeing. I see him as a number, unfortunately, because he's a transfer he makes enough wage, and Atletico Madrid is paying it. So I just want to say I do support you in your João Felix stuff. It's just a matter of,
No, I mean, I get that. And the thing is, so we keep saying with João Felix that it's the environment, and I know that people are like fed up with that because, it cannot be in the environment like 3 or 4 times in a row, right? It has to be the player because, that's the only common denominator here. It's always the player, right? In every single club, it was the environment. That's what the Felix's defenders, you always say. But I feel like that's kind of true because he's not really played in I wouldn't say healthy environment, in an environment that kind of suits him the best, that brings the best out of him. He's not had that in his career probably, and that's since Benfica, exactly. I mean Chelsea, Atletico Madrid, that's not really the kind of system, the kind of structure, the kind of team to get the best out of him anyway. So I think it's a fair thing to say. And this Barcelona team as well, I mean, it's nowhere near a team that would take a player like Felix and make him the world's best. I mean, he's not touching his peaks at this Barca. I keep saying that. So that's why if the money is too big to buy him, I wouldn't buy him. I mean, I feel like he's special. I feel like he's good. But if Barca keep playing like they're playing right now, I mean, that might change with a new coach, but you never know who's going to come. You never know what kind of a game model he's going to have. But under Xavi and this Barca, Felix is not becoming the player that we need him to be. So if the cost is too high, no, I wouldn't go for him. If it's another loan, for example, okay, that can work. If it's a low, very, very low transfer, I guess, but that's not happening either. I mean, at this stage, I wouldn't keep him. I wouldn't. Cancelo, I mean, he's also pretty valuable in what he does. He's very versatile. He does things, as you said, that no one else does. But at the same time, I was the one who kept pushing for someone like Fresneda over Cancelo because I felt like that was the type of player that we needed more than Cancelo at the same time. And I don't know. So in this particular moment, I would take Rafinha and Koundé probably because Rafinha, he is not flashy. He's not really a difference maker at all times. He is very one-dimensional, and that all is fair, but he gives you value. He gives you threat constantly. When you look at the numbers, Rafinha tops our metrics, even though he's, one-dimensional. He's not really as smart, as intelligent as Lamine Yamal, for example, but he gets the job done as well, and he gets you to the final third. He gets you the threat, the numbers as well. So I feel like there is value in someone like Rafinha, more so than someone like Felix, because Rafinha, for as much as he is one-dimensional, he can kind of do his thing regardless, And Felix, maybe he needs a bit more, adjusting to, maybe more catering, more of a fine-tunement, if you will. And that's the problem with him.
Well, I think to that point, we don't really have time to really deep dive Lamine Yamal. I'll have to bring you on in the next few weeks to do that. But I think the Rafinha thing too. I mean, if I'm already losing João Felix on the left wing, the idea of having Rafinha, even if he's now just your sub, like, and you say that Rafinha, we have to figure out how to get you some left wing reps because Lamine Yamal is going to be our right winger for the future. I think even as soon as next season. I mean, he is right now. He is this season, and I've said I wish that he could just put him away. He's. I mean, I'd love if Xavi could have him play less than 2,200 minutes, but he's already up to 1,650, and it's too much. But hopefully Rafinha can come back and spell him quite a bit and kind of take that starting job back, not even out of merit, just out of necessity to keep Lamine Yamal protected for the next 10 years, 12 years. Oh my gosh, he's so young. 15 years. So, yeah, I mean, because you want to keep Lamine Yamal protected. So I would rather keep Rafinha to be, the person to help rotate Lamine Yamal than I would. Again, what I've seen from Julian Araujo at Las Palmas, he gets paid like 1/8 the amount. Like, again, you already paid the transfer fee for him, so he makes like 1/8 what Cancelo does. And I think they're different profiles, of course, but he gives you, he doesn't give you 1/8 of what Cancelo does. You know what I mean? For what you're paying for, I think he gives you 70% of what you get from Cancelo. I think he does do about 70% of that job. And so again, with Hector Fort, I again am surprised at how quickly he's being integrated in the first team too. He's ahead of schedule. So the fact that you have Hector Fort ahead of schedule and Julian Araujo, who is also exceeded expectations at Las Palmas, and every time I watch him, then you say, all right, let's go let's go ahead with the positive things that we have for, as I said, 1/8 of or 1/5 of the total price, Fort and Julian Araujo for Cancelo. All right, last quick three things here. Vitor Roque, red card appeal did not work. The competition committee upheld Vitor Roque's red card, and he was suspended for Sunday's match against Granada. Barcelona is trying to again appeal it to a higher court, but that stuff takes either 10 days, and usually that's why those never happen. It's always thrown out because it winds up not. He has to serve a suspension before the appeal would actually be approved, and you can't retroactively put him back in a match against Granada. I said at the time, and I'll repeat it again, I have also been researching a bit of history, so plugging some of the stuff for midweek next week. And there are times in Barcelona's history that corruption and that kind of stuff, there was merit to it, and it was real, and it was truthful. And I've said this rant before, and I'll say it again. I mean, these legal referees are incompetent to the point where I almost have to say, if you yell the word conspiracy at me, I don't know, maybe, but I don't believe it. But also, like, at this point, they're so incompetent. It's like, how is this
Mhm,
possible? I do
mhm,
think that this Vitor Roque red card or the second yellow, um, as this, the second, even if they say to the second yellow and he gets the red, not up immediately within 24 hours appealing this red card and saying those images are not enough to appeal the red card. This is to me the worst decision that's been made. I mean, this is the most unjust thing in the Barcelona, complaints or whatever this season. And I think Barcelona fans on social media, it's different than real life. And actually, I think Barcelona fans in general the same way. They have just become the boy who cries wolf so much. I know I don't know how to say the word wolf.
mm,
They're the boy who cried wolf so much to the point where it's just like, this is the one. I wish like Kool-Aid had just shut up about the
mm,
conspiracy and about fighting back against Negra and VAR and Tebas and corrupt whatever. Like I just wish that instead of all those other times when the referees were just bad, like they are around for all the Liga teams, and all the Liga
yeah.
teams have an argument. For all those times, I just was cool to just like kind of cooled it a little bit because now this Vitor Roque thing is just so bad that I wish like this was the moment that Barcelona came and said like, "Hey, this is so insane. Like, how is like it was just a bad call. It's a bad call. The fact that they didn't repeal it is awful. It's just, and I wish like Barcelona fans had like saved their energy for this moment because now I'm already exhausted, and I feel like
Mhm.
Barcelona fans are starting from this argument. Again, it's all the social media, but they're coming from a point now that they've been complaining for so long. They're like, well, you complained about the other stuff, and there was nothing to that. So now you're still
Mhm.
complaining, and that's what it
Mhm.
feels like now. And I don't know. It's frustrating to me.
I mean, it is absolutely is, and historically, I don't think our appeals have ever really been that effective. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but it just feels like whenever we do appeal, it never really works anyway. So, uh, but no, this whole refereeing discussion, I'm trying not to get sucked into it on social media because I feel like that's all people talk about these days. It's always, oh no, Barca have been robbed. It's a conspiracy. Real Madrid, will win the league because someone has already decided they will. And I don't know. Maybe there's some merit in all of that. Maybe there is someone up there, fixing games and bribing referees. But I just don't want to get into that as much because I feel like, at least from my point of view, I want to be talking about things that are more valuable than just the refereeing mistakes and conspiracy theories and all that stuff. So that's why I don't like when people, like, I will make a comment on the game and people will like, oh no, but the referees did this and that. I'm like, I don't care. I mean, I'm hurt obviously and I'm frustrated, but I don't really want to discuss that at all. And I'm trying to get away from all of that. But yes, to your point, it did seem like a bad call. It did seem like a bad decision for the referees. But there's just nothing that we can do at this point. And I think you're right. We just yeah, we cry so much over those things that at this point, no one will take us serious anymore, even if the case is serious and if we do have a real reason to be complaining. I mean, at this point, everyone's like, okay, that's Barca fans. They always do that. So I feel like there is some truth in that what you say, and I do agree. But again, I just I don't know what I can say that will make things better or that make things make sense. So I just try and stay away from it, to be honest.
Well, as I already plugged, I'll plug it again. That I've done stuff on
Mm,
the show in years past, but I'm working on a big piece with somebody for next week. Again, I actually have help on this one. That's how big this is, about history, and we do deep dive, and a portion of this history lesson basically is about when there was truth to that, when there was truth to that corruption. And I would say if there was real truth to this corruption between Florentino Perez and whatever, it would Laporta and Perez would not be doing the Super League together. Like if there was
mm,
actual corruption there, Laporta would not be in bed on the Super League with Florentino Perez. That's what his Barca is. So, okay.
mhm.
Speaking of decisions that Laporta has to make, I know we're so late in this, and it's kind of unfair because I'm like, I'm kind of almost jamming the potential future manager here in the 57th minute here or whatever we are. So Hansi Flick, there have been rumors this week about that he might be the guy, and I think there's a ton of fire behind this smoke. And the reason why we're only talking about Hansi Flick here for a moment because he is available, and that is the first and last reason why I think that there's a lot of. So the club, they would also want to bring him or a manager in as early as possible come the end of the season, and someone who is currently not tied to a club and someone who you don't have to pay their release from their club, that is Barca's guy at the moment, as long as he takes also a minor pay cut to come and wants to have a job. And it would be helpful if you had a guy who's kind of been around before and, well, especially a German manager who's been in Germany who didn't necessarily have the kind of Premier League manager wages that some other managers would want to match their La Liga salary. So Hansi Flick, just in all of those ways that have nothing to do with his tactics, have nothing to do with his time at Bayern Munich or the German national team or any of that stuff. That's why he makes the most sense to me. And I think 9 times out of 10, that's usually how it works with managers.
I would agree. I think that looking realistically, which of the elite coaches would be willing to, abandon ship and come to Barca right now? I think the only choices that we have are managers that are kind of not in the elite tier, but they're kind of down there. And if they called up by Barca, they go and they kind of gain on reputation, gain something from that appointment other than money and whatever it is. Because who would be that crazy to go to Barca now anyway? Because at this stage you don't have the money to really build something. You don't really have the squad is quite good, but it's mostly youngsters, and you need someone who can. I feel like the next appointment should be someone who can really, really work with those young players, someone who can take a good group of people and make them into a great group of people, right? That's the thing. Someone who can take the wood and the stone and make it into steel and diamonds, right? So that's the kind of manager they need, and someone who can kind of instill the fundamentals into this team. So maybe work on the defensive aspects and on compactness, on the principles of play and stuff like that. So I feel like the next couple of years, our expectations should still be kind of on the lower side because of all of that, because we'll need a couple of years to just get the basics right and develop these players. But we do have a young core that's excellent, that's quite good, that can be world class in a couple of years. And I feel like if we get the appointment right, so chase the profile, not the name. That's what I keep saying, and that's for players, but also for coaches, because if you need the right man for the job. Unfortunately, the perfect man doesn't exist at the moment because there's none available. And even if there was, would Barca be able to get them? And that's the question, because we don't have the money to offer them anyway. So at this moment, you have to chase someone who fits the profile, even though the name might not be, up there in the elite ranks. So I feel like Hansi Flick he is not in that elite echelon at the moment. So he's realistic in that sense. Now, tactically, I'm not sure. I don't want to talk too much because I'm yet to look into it more deeply, and I will do so for next week. I think we have some things planned on him, but I've seen people complain and say that he's not really the guy when it comes to so but I won't really comment that much as of right now because I need to look into it a bit more.
Well, to that point though about the the romanticism of the Barca job, I do still think that a manager like De Zerbi and to your point about raising his profile, I think if De Zerbi was in this position that Hansi Flick is in, I think that's a guy who would jump at the Barca job because I think there is still so much, merit. And again, if you're the guy that succeeds at Barcelona, and if you're a top manager that trusts and backs themselves, you think you're going to be the guy to fix the problems. And I think what keeps a guy like De Zerbi or any of the other managers that currently have jobs, even Michel for Girona, they would basically have to pay. Like there's a place where logic no longer exists on the off-field stuff. De Zerbi would basically have to pay to be the manager of Barcelona, and I think there is again romanticism, and there is the Barcelona job is not this thing that I think top managers are afraid of. I think that they would still take on that challenge and believe that they are going to be the guy. And again, like if you succeed at Barcelona, you're a legend, right? Like I mean, it just happens. Like you just become a legend if you really succeed at Barcelona. It just you can live for the rest of your life off of that kind of legacy by succeeding in Barcelona. Honestly, it's the same thing with Real Madrid and these other major clubs. You go and you live off that success. So I think the problem is that again, these managers financially, again, for their families, for their agents, for all the people in their financial peripheral, like they're not going to pay to go to Barcelona. I think they're going to bide their time and wait for that Barcelona job fits where they are in their managerial career. And so not saying no at the moment, but saying that, yeah, I mean, it's not right for me at the time. Okay. Lastly, here, I promise. Last thing. While we talked about the youngsters in the first team, the U19s dropped out of the UEFA Youth League, losing 6-5 on penalties to Mainz after a 2-2 game. Noah Darvic and Danny Rodriguez scored the goals. And those are two players that I'll be taking a bit more time to talk about in the coming weeks, by the way. So I have not forgotten about those two, but I'm not that bent out of shape by this exit. I usually say this is the case. If Cubarsi, Fort, Mark Yu, and Lamine Yamal, who are all very eligible, not a little eligible, like 2 or 3 years still eligible for that competition, if they had played that competition, I think Barcelona absolutely crushes Mainz in that match and wins that match 5-2. And we're not talking about anything. So they also, by the way, even the players that played in that game, the average of Barca's 11 in age was an entire year younger than Mainz's. So I'm not worried that they fell out of the competition. I told you the next, I did. I've told you, and even mentioned them in the show. I told you who the next talents are. And those players, especially in midfield, are like 15, 16 years old. So to me, it was a better opportunity for Darvish to keep getting himself comfortable. Something he's been done, he's done better this last month than the first half of the season. But now it's just going back to Barca Athletic, trying to, still get comfortable, figure himself out. And then Danny Rodriguez, what is his ceiling? Again, those are things and questions that I want to be answering with some others in the next coming weeks. But yeah, I'm not betting on achievement. Congrats to Mainz. I mean, if anything, they missed out. What was this? The quarterfinal, I think it was. So I think they missed out on 3 more total matches or whatever it was. So even if it's around a 16, they missed out on 4 total matches. I'm not cheap about it.
Yeah, I mean, not much else to add here. I don't think. To be honest with you, I've not been following them as much as I would want to, but I am excited to see how Noah Darvic kind of continues to do, because there's been a lot of hype around his transfer, but when I've seen footage of him, I've not been as impressed as I thought I would be at first. I feel like he still has a lot to work on to be able to become this talent that will eventually step into the first team, if he steps into the first team. So from the rumors, when he first joined, I thought that would be, a much more complete player, a much more developed player at that stage already. But that's maybe because, when you see players like Cubarsí and players like Lamine Yamal, you're like, okay, they're 16, 17, but they're already at such a high level that it's just kind of incredible to see, and kind of brings you back to reality, because you cannot expect that every single 16-year-old to be that good, to be that ready for the first team. And we truly have been blessed with these talents, and I feel like that's why this young core is so exciting, because they are so young when you think about it. It's mind-boggling to think that Yamal is 16 years old, and we're here making such big conclusions, such big predictions on kids. That's the state of this whole discussion. I mean, it's just incredible to me, because we don't even know how he'll develop, physically and mentally. And here we are predicting his profile, for the years to come. So it's very, very difficult. And kudos, credit to them, because they are truly, truly immense to be able to play for Barcelona's first team at such a young age. And that's, if there's one thing to be excited about, to be optimistic about, is that. I think I keep saying that's the thing that will keep us going, and I truly believe that. So yeah.
Well, yeah, and I also say about the Bergvall stuff, like for those who got like been out of shape by Bergvall, it's like Barcelona won the arms race for Darvic. I mean, he was one of the best players at the U17 World Cup with Germany, but we've seen that adaptation is difficult. So like the idea that even if Bergvall works at Tottenham, it might not have worked for him at Barcelona. And we talked about Frankie de Jong, how it doesn't really truly look like he fits in the way that Barcelona plays. And if the reports are to be believed, and again, the little tape that I watched at Bergvall, it looks like he plays in a very similar position as Frankie de Jong. That's why the comparisons were started. And it's like, well, okay, so Frankie de Jong, it took him 5 years to adapt to Barcelona style. Even if you call what he's done adapting, and so to expect a 17-year-old Bergvall to do that is like, it's not a miss to me. Even if he succeeds, like it's not crazy to me. I mean, and even on the right wing, like maybe Danny Rodriguez. I mean, he was a big prospect when he signed, but if it's not meant to be for him, because I think both he and Noah Darvic at this point, Danny Rodriguez being 19 and Darvic being, or 18 or 19, whatever, one of the two, and then Darvic being just turned 17, they both need the ball to feet to do most of their work, and that's not going to work at the top levels. So to your point about like the progressions that they make, is that Darvic is very special on the ball, but his total refined game, he's still figuring a lot of those things out, because again, like he just was the most talented player for a long time. And so now that he is not, give him 2 years even to figure that stuff out. And again, don't get better state about the Bergwalls, because even Daniel Rodriguez playing at right wing, like he's already behind Lamine Yamal. He might not ever have an opportunity in the first team. And Barcelona, by the way, are a year away from signing. They've already signed that peak contract with Ibrahim Diarra, the captain of the Mali U17 team from the last World Cup, the U17 World Cup. So like Diarra is supposed to be the other future right winger that Barcelona are bringing in as a high level prospect teenager. Their hope works out. So it is still a reminder that it's a gamble. And to your point about not watching the young players, I I kind of learned my lesson the last few years because I would try my best to watch as much as I can. But now with Cubarsí and Lamine Yamal and Hector Fort, it's like I feel like I have to now because it's like I need to be an expert on Marc Bernal because the kid might be in preseason, right? It's just like so that's where we're at with it. And so I think it's always that balance where Darvish was a big prospect when he was signed. So I am trying to be like, hey, I think that kid might be in the first team. But now seeing him struggle, you adapt your expectations and say, well, okay, maybe he might not make it in the first team, and that's okay. And that's okay. And then they get knocked out of the U19s, UEFA League. I don't care. All right. So anyone's still here. We've been broken. Barcelona has broken us down with the topics that we talked about, but I'm glad we got the positives and negatives. And as always, Domagoj, you were terrific. And I will have in the description down below your piece about Christensen. So we didn't really throw too many stats. We didn't have. I don't have the imagery. Just him and I talking. I hope you enjoyed our faces. If you're watching on YouTube, but I will have his article down in the show notes below. And I said, keep a lookout for the stuff that, again, this midweek does allow me to kind of do some other things, that I usually even do in the off season. So check all that stuff out on Twitter, Instagram, Patreon, all that good stuff. So Domagoj, thank you so much for coming on the show again.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a while actually, and I do enjoy our chats. So yeah, glad to be here as ever.
Yeah, and I appreciate everyone listening. This was the longest time, not the longest show ever. This is the longest folks. But yeah, midweek stuff, we had a lot to do. So glad we got to it. Thanks so much for listening to the show. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon.